all women athletes and women's athletics in general is much more healthy when we can all be who we are.
This is Spirit of Sport with Georgia McKee
and Kelsey Davis.
Join us as we explore the spiritual life, leadership, and sports. Our hope is to offer bread for your journey, wherever you are. Kelsey, one thing that we share in our journeys is that we were both told our queerness wasn't allowed in spaces like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. But today we talk with a queer sport icon, Pat Griffin, who tells us a story where she, a lesbian, non-religious person, goes up to FCA reps decades ago and creates a relationship with them.
Dude, we were both crying.
I was bawling my eyes out by the end of the episode. Because listen, that aisle she crossed, I had seen it as a wall for so long. Because this faith community meant so much to me and rejected me for who God made me to be. And yet she embodies the spirit of Christ himself and offers herself, her story, to be in a relationship with her neighbor.
Pat is a professor emerita in the social justice education program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and is the author of a book entitled Strong Women, Deep Closets, Lesbian and Homophobia in Sports. She's also a member and a leader of NCAA's Common Ground Initiative, which seeks to provide dialogue and relationship between faith-based institutions and ministries and the LGBTQ plus community. Pat truly lives what she teaches.
She's truly a trailblazer in our community, and we hope you enjoy the conversation after this message from our partner.
Hi, I'm Callie Cawthon-Friels, leader of the Faithful Pride Initiative at Good Faith Media. The Faithful Pride Initiative seeks to highlight stories of LGBTQ+ people of faith doing inspiring work around the country and the world. It's a space by queer people for queer people. As we share stories and resources, we hope to be a place where LGBTQ+ people can continue to learn ways to reconcile and celebrate both their queerness and their faith. Come join us at goodfaithmedia.org.
Pat, welcome to Spirit of Sport. We are so privileged and honored to land with you in this space and in this time of learning from your wisdom and your lived experiences. So thank you so much for being with us.
Kelsey, I'm honored to be here, and I admire the work that you do with Christian athlete circles, and it's my honor to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. So Pat, you have been leading for decades in various sectors in various ways, and we would love to hear you share about a time or maybe a time or two when you really felt called to take a stand in the face of injustice and how you found the courage to act in that moment.
Well, I thought of two instances. The first was in the early 80s, and I had been coaching swimming at the University of Massachusetts for a long time as a very closeted lesbian with a large circle of closeted lesbian friends. And yet I also, like when I would go out socially at night, like to a dance club or something, I would often run into athletes from UMass, not necessarily just from my team, but basketball players and field hockey players and so on. And so the word kind of went around that I was gay among the athletes. And so some of them started coming to me and just wanting to talk, or maybe they had a bad breakup with a lover, or their parents had kicked them out of the house. I mean, there were all kinds of stories. And I realized that it was appalling to me that these next generation athletes were struggling with the same stuff I struggled with as an athlete in the 60s. And that was appalling to me. And I yearned to be the person or a person who would challenge that in sport to make it life better, for LGBT athletes. Although at that time we're not even talking about the T at all. And so, but I was too afraid to do it. And I kept waiting. And thinking, okay, pretty soon you'll be courageous enough and, you'll be able to speak out and be publicly out as a lesbian and everything. And I went to a conference in Boston, and there was a woman there. It was an African-American lesbian woman But she read a quote from Audre Lorde, and the quote was something like, like, if we wait until we're not afraid, we'll be speaking from our graves. And I felt like she was speaking directly to me because it made me realize you're always gonna be a little scared, but you have to do it anyway. And so I had an opportunity to speak at a national, it was called the New Agenda for Women in Sport. It was sponsored by the Women's Sports Foundation and several, corporate entities like AT&T and stuff like that. But they were completely silent on the topic of lesbians in sport and homophobia in sport. None of the panels that they'd organized addressed this. And in fact, the panel I got assigned to was the title, the question that we had to address was, how do we as women athletes address threat to our sense of femininity and womanhood? And so I decided to attack the question instead of answering the question. And I did. And I came out and I, talked about the real issue was homophobia and lesbians and women who didn't demonstrate the proper kind of femininity were assumed to be lesbians, and that was a threat to all women. And it caused quite a stir at the conference. The conference leaders were terrified that saying the word lesbian or homophobia would, turn off all the corporate sponsors and drop the women's sports movement back. And yet there were other women who were celebrating, that the topic had finally been broached. And so I also got a lot of support. But I can remember, feeling the fear, and yet it felt so good to speak out, and especially in that forum, to take the lead, which is what I wanted to do, on behalf of my athletes. And so that was the first one that I thought of. And it was really the beginning of me speaking out, all the time and sort of being the person who was addressing homophobia in women's sports in particular.
Pat, I've heard the argument over the years that the discussion or conversation around sexuality doesn't belong in sports. That you should show up and do your job and go home, and you shouldn't talk about your personal life. None of that matters. What have you learned over the years of why it's necessary to talk about this intersection in this space?
Wow. Well, on a personal level, having had many friends and colleagues who were in coaching, who that was their motto, is that you had to keep a strict separation between your personal life and your professional life to survive. And I think some of them, that was absolutely true. They did. If they wanted to continue to be a coach or to be in any area of education, they did. They had to keep a separate line there. And I think that's still true in certain parts of the country, unfortunately. So there's that part. And Kate Fagan wrote a book, sort of a memoir, talking about her experience as an athlete at actually University of Colorado. And there's one scene in the book when she's talking about, she's sort of at her lowest point of dealing with being a lesbian and feeling like there was no hope for her future. And she was sitting in the dark gym, and her coach came in, who was one of those coaches who kept a clear separation in the professional and personal parts of her life. And that's what she recommended to Kate as the way to survive. And Kate wrote this incredible description. She said it was like her coach had hidden herself, sort of dressed herself in this cloak that hid who she was for so long that it had become a part of her skin, and she couldn't take it off now. And I just love that description of, what it's like. It's like the hiding becomes you, and you can never reach your potential because you can't be who you are. So I think that's the most damaging part of it. And then that legacy has been passed down through generations of coaches, that the only way to survive is to hide. And, I'm very proud of the younger generations now who have completely rejected that motto. And I think, it's all women athletes and women's athletics in general is much more healthy when we can all be who we are, whether that's in our faith or our sexual orientation or our gender identity or race. I think so that's the biggest cost to me is a huge personal cost. Professionally, as long as the lesbian label can be used to intimidate women in any career, whether it's politics or sports or whatever, it inhibits the growth of that particular institution. And I think that's certainly been true in sports for many years. Not so much anymore. I remember negative recruiting used to be a huge thing, and probably still is some places. When a coach would tell a prospective athlete and her parents, you don't want to go to that school because they have lesbians in that program. Come here. It'll be a family environment here. And So as long as, people are afraid to claim who they are and to provide protections for coaches and athletes, then it can be used against the entire area of women's sports or men's sports, although it manifests itself differently, I think, in men's sports.
Pat, you are truly a trailblazer in this work, and most of your advocacy was done and has been done before same-sex marriage was legal, let alone socially accepted. And so what would you say are your core values? What grounded you during all of these divisive times?
Well, that's a interesting question, I should say, to me, because after having spent so much time working in common ground, where we're bringing LGBTQ people in athletics together with people of faith in athletics. One of the things that's been really interesting to me is that deep down, even if you're an agnostic like me, I have so many core values in common with my friends and colleagues who are Christians or Jews or Latter-day Saints or whatever their faith is, that it's like there are core values to me that are universal values that sort of transcend religion. And I think the core of it is love and compassion. Definitely those two. I mean, I'm sure that I could think of others, but it just seems like if you live your life with the core values of love and compassion, that's pretty good guidance for trying to live a good life, whether you identify as a person of faith or not.
That's really beautiful, Pat. I also just this morning was reading I have different different books that I kind of pick up in the morning to read from. And the one I read this morning was from Thich Nhat Hanh. And he was talking exactly about what you're describing, and that when our hearts are full of love and compassion, we are actually more free to be ourselves, to love others more fully, and to let go. And so there's sort of this expansiveness of curiosity, of welcome. And, that's what I've experienced of you as well. And that's what I've experienced of Common Ground and our Common Ground team and our gatherings. And I'm curious if you would be willing to just share with our listeners a little bit more about Common Ground and what is it? How has it changed you? Why do you love it?
Can I tell the story that I'm sure you've heard a million times about how I walked across the aisle? All right, I want to tell that first because that changed me for sure. For a while after I retired from UMass Amherst, I was running a program for the Women's Sports Foundation called It Takes a Team. And it was a program that was doing education and advocacy work for making sports more welcoming for LGBTQ people. And I had a booth at the Women's Basketball Coaches Association where I had all of my literature out on the table about how to make your team safer for people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. And of course, at the same conference, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and Athletes in Actions, two very conservative Christian ministries were there. And we never interacted with each other. I would never have talked to them. But I used to sneak over and look at their literature, and sometimes I'd find conversion therapy stuff and, I could be all outraged about it, but I would never talk to them. And so year after year, there they were and there I was. And I do not know what led me to do this, but my good friend Gary Pine, who is the athletic director at APU, Azusa Pacific University, and a member of our Common Ground leadership team, until just recently, he says, well, God called you to go across that aisle. Well, I don't know whether it was God or what it was, but I decided I was going to go talk to them. So I went across the aisle to their booths and introduced myself, said what I was doing there, and I knew what they were doing, and I knew we had a lot of big differences, but I asked if they would like to talk to see if we had anything in common. And I found 3 women from the booths who said they would like to do that. So we pulled up some chairs out in the concession area, and we had a 2-hour conversation that was incredible. They were so vulnerable, and I tried to match their vulnerability. We did find some things we had in common. And actually, by the end of the 2 hours, we decided that we wanted to run a program the following year together addressing this topic. And so we did. We did that for 2 years, preceding Common Ground, where we got together and all these women of faith. And I got in touch with some of my lesbian basketball friends, and we did programs that were pretty successful. We were very scared the first time. We had no idea what would happen, what people would the people who came, what they would say, or whether it would explode or what, but it was the beginning. And then from there, we got a grant, several of us who had been participating in that program, some of the lesbians who had been participating in that program. We got a grant from the LGBT Sports Coalition, which was funded by Nike, to organize the first Common Ground in 2014. And basically, our goal was to bring people of faith, particularly we were interested in attracting conservative people of faith in athletics and LGBTQ people in athletics, to have conversations about what common ground we have and to explore ways that all kinds of different schools, whether it was faith-based schools or large public schools, could make athletics a better place for people of all sexual orientations, gender identities, and faiths. And so that was the origin of Common Ground. And we've had 7 Common Grounds since then.
I just want to pause here. Pat, Georgia and I are both in tears. And for those who are listening to this podcast and maybe not seeing it visually, I can at least express for myself. My tears are welling from a deep place of gratitude, Pat, for your courage, for your leadership to cross the aisle. And Georgia and I have both been in spaces where we could not fully be ourselves as Christians, as athletes, as queer people. And just to know that you were doing that years and years and years ago when we didn't even know each other yet speaks to the profound, deep interconnection of what love does in this world and how deeply we are connected, and that we stand on your shoulders, Pat, and you made a way for us to come into our full selves and our full being now, and you didn't even know that yet. And so my tears come from just a deep place that there was a Pat Griffin years ago willing to broach the table of difference and to bring together these two disparate worlds that continue to want to be at odds with each other and fight with each other into some place of reconciliation, of healing, of friendship. And so I just thank you for your leadership. And I'm literally moved to tears. You have made a place at the table for me. So thank you.
Pat, I had never heard that story before, so that's why I'm just an absolute mess over here. As a Christian and as someone who, because of what happened in spaces that you're talking about with organizations you're talking about, because of getting kicked out of leadership roles, I questioned whether or not I was going to stay a Christian. And for me, I came back to Christianity, one, because it was a way that I was formed that really kind of shaped who I was, but also because of this person named Jesus, who's really important in the Christian faith, who continuously crosses the aisle, who continuously shows up to people who aren't like him, to people who society is trying to reject. And for me, that's what I was experiencing and desiring and craving so badly in those spaces, but wasn't seeing from my fellow Christians. And is a reason why Kelsey and I created Christian athlete circles, because we see that Jesus is the way, he exemplified this way of crossing aisles. And so to hear you share the story of the way that you have shown us the love of Christ, even yourself not being a Christian, is so deeply, deeply moving and meaningful. So thank you for sharing that.
One of the things that grew out of Common Ground for me is getting to know people who were working in athletics in faith-based schools, pretty conservative faith-based schools, who had pretty restrictive policies regarding how open, or even if they LGBT students could be on campus. And I did not understand why a person who identified as LGBT would go to a faith-based school when I started this work with Common Ground. And one of the things that grew out of these Common Ground meetings is that I got invited to go and speak at a couple of faith-based schools. And I always would ask if it was possible if I could meet with some LGBT students there. And I did have the opportunity to do that. And I have to say that I learned so much about faith and the deep faith that these students had. They loved their school. They didn't like the policies that restricted them, but they had this deep faith that their school fed. At the same time, that if they could, they would have changed some of the policies that were in effect. And that was a big learning for me because it taught me the power of faith, even when there's an inherent conflict sometimes in between the faith and your identity. And I really cherish those meetings with students because I learned so much about them and the work that they did, and their journey as people of faith, which was new to me.
Pat, what wisdom would you offer to the next generation of athletic administrators or coaches or even athletes who want to make real change but aren't sure where to start?
I believe everybody has a sphere of influence. It may be small to begin with. It might even remain small. It doesn't matter. I feel like identifying, where you have influence. Maybe it's just with friends, teammates, but that's an important sphere of influence that can change life for people. And then you can work to spread that sphere of influence out. Maybe it's maybe it's a department, an athletic department. Maybe it's the whole school as an institution. Maybe it's your family. But I think that's the key, is starting with a sphere of influence where people know you, respect you, want to hear what you have to say, even if they disagree with it. And so I think that's important to know where to start. What identifying your sphere of influence.
I love that, Pat. It feels attainable and sustainable. That if I start with my sphere, I start smaller with the people immediately around me, I can do that. That's achievable and not the total overwhelm of needing to overhaul the whole system all at once. So thank you for that. We have a new tradition on this podcast. We're doing a rapid response, sort of closing 3 questions. So whatever comes to mind is good. And so are you willing to dive into the last 3 questions here, just rapid fire? Okay. All right. First one, if you could have any career besides what you're doing or what you've done, what would you do?
I think I would want to be a famous singer-songwriter who played guitar and sang in front of huge, adoring audiences.
I love that. Do you play guitar now?
Well, I have played guitar. I've sort of abandoned my guitar playing. I keep saying I'm going to get back to it and get my calluses back and start playing again. I haven't done it yet, but I grew up in the hootenanny era, so everybody played guitar. So I can play guitar.
I love it. I live in Appalachia, so I'm in full support, and Georgia's in Dallas, Texas. So I think we're both on board with that. So that's great. All right. Number 2, recommend something to watch, read, or listen to.
Well, this is related to just the larger national scene right now. I love Heather Cox Richardson. She's a historian, and she writes a daily Letters from an American, which you can subscribe to. It'll come to your email inbox or probably any place you would like to have it come, I guess. And she talks about the current context we're living in, the current political and social context, and puts it into historical context, which I find incredibly helpful in terms of dealing with everything that's going on in our country today. So that's definitely one thing I would recommend to read. I don't know what to recommend in terms of what to watch. I haven't really thought about that. I've been watching The Residents on Netflix, which is really fun and sort of an escape. And I would recommend that if somebody wants to watch a really fun something like that that's streaming.
Awesome. Okay, last one. This is a fill in the blank. Okay. The world needs.
The world needs courage and compassion. I feel like, those of us right now who are unhappy with the direction our country is going, we have to have courage. We have to have compassion, and we have to have persistence. We have to, and patience. Although maybe the patience is with a small p instead of a capital P. But this is long haul work that requires every one of us as citizens who believe in democracy and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our democratic way of life. We have to have courage and compassion.
We say yes to that, Pat. Thank you for your courage and compassion, for your persistence. You are certainly an inspiration to us, and we are grateful to be in community with you.
Well, again, Georgia, Kelsey, thank you so much for the work you do. so important, and you're saving lives. It's no smaller way to describe what you do.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
Thank you to our producer, James Franklin, and to Jay Ragsdale, who created our theme music. We are so grateful for the financial support that makes Spirit of Sport podcast possible. Special thanks to the Center for Contemplative Justice, Good Faith Media, Episcopal Church Foundation of Western North Carolina, the Episcopal Diocese of Western North Carolina, and donors like you. Spirit of Sport podcast is a ministry of Christian Athlete Circles. If you love this content, sign up for our devotional, The Weekly Huddle, on our website, christianathletecircles.org, and follow us on Instagram. And if you liked this episode, do us a favor. Leave us a rating and share it with your community. Peace and love, y'all.